Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And I thought it would be a good idea to shoot a video on how I store my home canned goods. Now keep in mind, this is how I store them. This is not necessarily how I recommend doing it because there is some pretty strict guidelines out there, and rightfully so, because you have to be very careful on how you store your jars so that you're not losing your seal. One of the most important things I find is keeping them in a climate controlled area. That means years and years ago when I first started getting into canning, mostly all I did was jams and salsa and home canned peaches. That was it. And I would keep my jars stored outside in the shop. Not outside, but in the shop where the temperature could get freezing in the winter time. And what I started finding, especially once the canning lids, I talked about it in a video I did last year about the canning lids and how they've changed over the years. And I'll go ahead and link to that video right up here. When they made that change, coupled with storing it out in a shop that could get hot in the summer and freezing in the winter, I was starting to lose seals on my canning jars. And so once my oldest son moved out and we were able to take his bedroom and turn it into a pantry, it finally gave me an area to store my home canned goods inside where I could control the climate. Now keeping it cool is really important. When you have major temperature fluctuations, hot, cold, hot, freezing, that's one of the things that's going to affect the integrity of your canning jar lids. Now right here I have a Tatler lid. I use both the metal and the Tatler. Little by little each year I keep buying more Tatler lids because I would like to eventually have completely all Tatler lids. Right now what I do is I use all my Tatler lids on anything that's going to be more acidic. Peaches, salsas, tomatoes, my hot sauce, and I have a video, by the way, on this plum hot sauce. I'll go ahead and link to it up here if you're interested in the recipe. But some other things do allow, despite what the canning Nazis may say, for a little bit of variance, because you have to consider how much space do you have. You may live in an apartment and you want to can a lot of stuff. You may not have a lot of shelf space. You might not have a lot of storage area. Our canning area, our food storage area, even though it's a bedroom, it's still not fully there yet because we still have to get my son's twin bed and dresser out of there before we can finish getting on all our shelves to put all our food storage. But right now I'm still having to make the most out of the shelf space that I have, because I might have the storage space, I don't have a lot of shelf space to keep these things, me from having to trip over these things by laying them all out on the floor, because you're not supposed to stack them, which is true. But there are ways around that you can make it work. Now I posted a picture on the community page not too long ago, and there was a couple people that expressed a little bit of concern about seeing how I was stacking my jars. But there's some things that they cannot see. And one of those things are in the jars on the top shelves. That is all dehydrated stuff. So I stack the jars right on top of each other and I don't worry about it because it's all dehydrated stuff that's been vacuum sealed. Even if it loses its seal, as long as I'm using it up within the first year, it's not a big deal. And in that case, of course, I keep the bands on there too because it's dehydrated, it's not pressure canned, it's not water bath canned, not a big deal. Now for any jars that I'm going to store on a top shelf where there's absolutely nothing on top of it, I do take the bands off like I've done here, because this will go on a shelf that I don't need to put anything on top of it. Now on some of these, because we have these big spaces and not enough shelves, what we've done is we've taken cardboard or real thin board plywood and stuck it between, so that when we set the jars on top of the other one, at least the pressure's being dispersed out a little bit farther. And the other trick is the jars on the bottom, I keep the bands on. Well, I shouldn't say I keep the bands on, because I always take all the bands off my canning jars after they've sealed, wash everything up real good, and then if it's going to be on that bottom part, I will put the band on very loosely like that. I don't I don't tighten it down. I put it on as loose as I can get it without it actually falling off. And that is so that when those boards sit on top of the jar, all the weight is going onto the lid, onto the band, and onto the glass ring, and not onto the lid itself. So there's very little to no weight actually being put onto this part here. And whenever I can, whatever layer is on top of that, I try to make sure they're lighter weight things. So that's not always possible. I do try to make sure they're like dried stuff or just smaller jars, so there's as little weight going onto the jars as possible. Now, I've had very little issue. I know there's people whose heads are probably exploding right now because I'm talking about putting weight on top of that. I know it's not the absolute best way to do it. It's what I have to do to make the most out of my space. And personally, I've been doing this for a number of years and have had no issues with losing the seal on my jars as a result of this type of stacking. Now, I'm not necessarily recommending this is how you do it. You may want to follow the strict guidelines, and I understand that. But if you have limited space, I'm just telling you this is what I'm done. This is what's worked for me. I don't have the bands on so tight that if a seal does get broken and a possible contamination gets in there, I should still be able to see mold or whatever developing in there, because we know that botulism doesn't give you a, you know, there's no sight, there's no smell, there's no detectable way to know it's in there. So that's why you want to make sure that your seals, that there actually mold can grow in there if your seal gets broken. And if you have your band down tight, your seal breaks, the bacterias or whatever get in there, the bad bacterias, and then it gets a false seal, then you're not going to develop mold, and so you won't know if you've got botulism growing in there. Now, a word on botulism, I recommend you go check out the CDC and really read the statistics on that. There's a lot of fear going on about botulism and home canned foods that is really unwarranted. Cases of botulism that come from home canned goods is actually rather rare compared to other ways that you can get it, especially from store-bought foods and other situations. It's less likely to happen from home canned foods. I'm not saying it can't, and I'm not saying, I know people say that once you get botulism, it may make you feel like you're dying, but also the cases of death from botulism is even more rare. You're more likely to get struck by lightning and killed that way than you are to die from botulism. I say all that because not that I think you should not be careful. It is very important to be very careful about how you can your stuff, but you should also not be afraid of it. You are more likely to get sick from store-bought foods, to get salmonella and all E. coli and all kinds of stuff like that from your store-bought stuff than you are from your own home canned foods. It's just something you shouldn't be afraid of. It should not be holding you back from canning and storing and doing the best you can to store in the area that you have. Okay, and then some other notes about storage is that it's also good to keep your jars in a place where you can keep them dark. The old-fashioned way they did it was actually put curtains over their shelves, or that it was stored in a cellar where no light got in. I have curtains over the window. With that room back there stays pretty dark most of the time. That's one of the reasons why it's hard for me to get good pictures in there, because even the one light we have is not super bright, and with all the storage that we have, it blocks quite a bit of light from coming through there. But yes, you want to still keep your things dark, because the more light exposure they get, the more the nutrients within the jars are going to break down. And now the other thing that I wanted to talk about was rotation. People are asking me how I rotate. Yeah, it is a bit of a chore that I only have to do once a year with each section. So whenever I'm canning more peaches, and I still have peaches from the year before, everything on that shelf has to come out of it, because that happens to be one of the shelves where things are stacked, and I have the boards in between. So I have to take everything off the top and then everything off the bottom, and then I take the newest things, the stuff I just freshly canned, and put it on the bottom, and then the peaches from the year before after I got everything on the bottom, are going to go on top of that, and those are the ones that I'm going to use. Again, with the bands very loose on the bottom row of peaches, and then the bands removed from the peaches on top that have the cardboard or the thin plywood underneath them. And anyway, that's what's been working for me. It is a job, it is a chore. I have to do the same thing with the potatoes and certain other sections of my canning area, just to keep things rotating through so that I'm not, something's not sitting in there forever and ever and ever. Now with the jams and stuff, they sit on a short shelf. They always put all the jams now in pint-sized jars because we don't need them any bigger than that. And the pint-sized jars fit perfectly within in the shorter shelves, and so all those and the applesauce go in the shelves like that, and then I just rotate them from back to front. And yeah, again, it's kind of a chore. You got to pull everything out, but I only typically am going to do that once a year because typically I'm only canning that kind of stuff once a year. Everything comes out and then everything goes back in order from oldest to newest towards the back. So that's how I rotate. Well, I hope that kind of helps you understand how I do things. This isn't necessarily supposed to be an educational video. I highly recommend you go check out the different places. Look in your ball canning book. Look at go to your different websites that talk about safe canning and safe storage. And I recommend you go by that. But if you're looking for a way to store things and to work things out in a pinch, because you don't have the space, you don't have the shelf storage, or whatever it is, these are some suggestions that have worked for me, for us. We've had no problems, we've never been sick, and I haven't lost a seal on any of my jars since I stopped storing them in the shop where the temperature fluctuations were great and brought them inside. Even with stacking them the way I do, even with sometimes the weight being a little bit heavy, just making sure those bands are loose and the pressure is distributed as evenly as possible across everything. Okay, so just take it for what it is and do your own research and find out what's going to work best for you and what you think is safest for you and your family. And remember, it's just how we do things and that it works for us. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.